Coffee Break with BBA Fresh Brew 4, presented by Banking Book Analytics.
Hello, my name is Paola Saad. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Banking Book Analytics. And we're here today with our Coffee Break BBA, Journey to the C-Suite. And it's basically what we're trying to do to trace the career path of successful executives. And it has two takeaways. First one is giving back to the community, such as youth, to emulate and follow the footsteps of these leaders, and also knowledge transfer for peers to learn from the experience of the executives. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's guest, Anthonet Maramieri. Anthonet is a dynamic executive with over 20 years of building and leading diverse teams and driving innovative growth strategies, primarily in the financial services. She has been a determined and passionate leader throughout the career, working for financial institutions such as CIBC, GE Money, ING, Bridgewater Bank, and BankWest, as well as the regulation of insurance with the Alberta Insurance Council. She's had titles such Chief Operating Officer, VP Operations, Technology, Ombudsman, Legal and Compliance, and VP Strategic Initiatives. So, Anthonet, so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for coming. I met Anthonet through a BD effort last year, and we kept in touch. And we're very happy to have her here today to share some of her experience with us.
Thank you, Paola.
Thank you. So we have, what we're going to do here, we have 5 questions. 4 will be in your path, your career path. And the 5th one is the crystal ball question. So let's start with, how did your career path take you to strategy and innovation?
Well, thank you, Paola. That is a really timely question, a terrific question, given all the change that we've seen happen so rapidly in the last couple of years. But if I think about my career in its entirety, I think pivot is the key word for my career, and probably lots of other C-suite and executive or leaders, for that matter, careers, regardless of the industry that they've been in. A career, I believe, is a series of pivots. And, so long as you follow your true passions, what do they say? If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And so following with that passion, as well as making decisions throughout your career to not necessarily stand still for elongated periods of time, unless, again, you are absolutely loving and passionate about what you do. So for me, my passion has been learning, growing, developing, but of course also contributing, creating value, adding value, both to my teams, my organizations, and to my customers or my constituents or consumers. So yes, through my career, I've basically worked in financial services very broadly, everything from sales to operations and strategy. And of course, strategy has to be an underlying theme, regardless of which business area you're working in the organization you're in. So you can't just think tactical and today. You have to think big picture. You have to think long term. And at every step, you have to be challenged. You have to be a little bit uncomfortable to ensure that you're growing and you're always contributing. I know when I look back 20 years ago, well, longer, 20 years ago, I never thought that I would get to this stage in my career. And that is probably, the quintessential problem in the gender. As a woman, we have confidence gaps, and there have been studies that indicate that women don't necessarily apply for a role unless they can tick every box of requirements and competencies necessary. And so to that, I say you have to have the courage as a woman. You're a hardworking individual. You're smart. If you have the competencies and the passion for the role, then read the job and role descriptions with you in that driver's seat. And that, of course, will put your foot in the door. Give yourself a chance, have that courage. Now, the other piece, which is a little bit of a jagged little pill when you're thinking about career transitioning, notwithstanding the fact that I absolutely encourage, take the stepping stone approach, take the growth approach, building blocks, and make difficult decisions sometimes in terms of timing or the nature of a role, because realizing that a role is not for you, that too is an invaluable lesson to learn from a self-awareness standpoint, and also from really giving focus to where you want your career to go. You don't know sometimes how something fits until you try it on. And that is the same with a role. And, one of the most important things that I've taken away from my recent MBA at Haskayne University of Calgary was to fail fast. And that's not to say, don't put in the effort, don't do the work, but be it an entrepreneurial endeavor or understanding what is something that is a strength or is not, be willing and able and adaptable and flexible to pivot, because every step in your career is an opportunity towards yet another step in your journey. So with women, we need to lean in, and we need to emulate, the male culture of having that confidence, having that belief in ourselves, and having the courage to try. And that is with every relationship, not just every role. So I hope that that provides a little bit of, ensuring that flexibility, the open mind, being a little bit uncomfortable, but that personal satisfaction and growth that we need in where we spend all of our time in our careers.
Yeah, you touched on some couple really interesting points that I like to comment on. So first one is, being a woman in like financial industries would be like, technically a male, has been historically a sort of a male kind of environment, and being a woman, and the fact that we're, the lean in and being at the table and not having to tick all the boxes to actually apply for a position, which I guess it's a trait of the, female population to do that. We want to know that we're be able to do it before saying we can do it, and then we get there, and it might be a challenge. And sometimes it's okay to be risky. It's okay to say, I can do most of these things and I can do them well, and I can just learn to do the other things that come with it. And having that confidence in yourself and almost courage to move ahead and do that, which, again, historically, and males have they have an easier time doing that than females. And the other thing that you mentioned in terms of, like in every relationship, we have to learn not only what we like, but also what we don't like. And sometimes we go into relationships and having a position is that what you don't want. You're not really sure what you want, but you do know what you don't want for sure. And that comes again with experience in applying and being in other positions. So you made some really good points in that, and being able to pivot at the right time, which is, I guess, one of the keys to success, the timing of, knowing when to pivot. So thank you for that. Great comment. Thank you. So the second question would be, you were a VP Client Services, a U.S. mortgage valuation service provider. How was the transition to an international company, and what advice you would have for others looking to go on the same path?
Well, that too is a terrific question, Paola, given how small the world has become, how interdependent countries are, and companies' expansions into other countries. I have worked for, some US firms. I've worked for some European-led firms. And so there is something to be said about exposure to working in international. So I'll start on touching with the US marketplace, for example. We speak the same language, we share a lot of the same media, yet there are some significant cultural differences, and not just US versus Canadian and one border. I mean, we note in Canada the differences from province to province. And so in the US, that very much exists amongst all of the states. For example, you can compare, Texas and California and Connecticut, and no three or none of them are alike. So keeping in mind that those differences are so core to how business operates and runs. The mechanics, absolutely the same. Financial statements, the balance sheet. Once you read the regulations, once you understand the accounting standards, that's very tangible. It's very clear. You understand it. But the cultural differences, that is where I believe most of your effort needs to be in terms of your first exposures to a US firm or an international firm, is understanding those cultural differences. You have to make an effort, you have to embrace, you have to learn, you have to try to understand the differences in communication style, something as simple as how meetings operate to emails and how emails are sent. So that is a really key element when you are working for an organization who's headquartered in another country or to which you are relocating for. Having said all of that, you think, well, how do you do that? You get a new job, you're working with, let's say, a US run or a Dutch run organization or something British. What do? Well, you think about your role in thirds. A third of the role should be a slam dunk. Things that are very intuitive to you in terms of your area expertise or focus. The second third is, you're comfortable, but you're learning, it's nuanced, you're not quite an expert, you're not quite there yet. And then thirdly is the area of focus where you need to close that knowledge gap. And when the role has an international flair to it, that is where your knowledge gap needs to be focused on the cultural aspects. That is really, really critical. I noted, for example, in my work with US, that the spectrum of differences and variations between states is both broader and deeper. And so it's not just, read a book, watch a couple of programs or TED Talks, but speak to your peers in those countries or states. Speak to your leaders, leverage your teams, your people on the ground as the best possible resource you have. When I was involved with some US companies, I relied heavily on my US counterparts to really help me understand and totally, putting up your hand and saying, this is a bit nuanced. It's not a criticism. I'd like to better understand because I would do this a little bit differently. So please help me to understand, and please give me feedback if I'm going a little bit offside to what is an acceptable approach to whatever the case might be, a presentation, a pitch, an email, something so simple. And your peers, your colleagues, your boss, all of these folks are codependent in your success, in the success of the company, in their own success, in the growth trajectory. And so when you are thinking about how to approach this in, let's say, your first 30, 60, 90 days, really ensure that you are carving out time for those diverse cultural nuances that are really going to be critical to your success. And don't be afraid to lead your teams. Again, culture is so much harder to grasp and to acclimatize to than the tangibles like accounting standards, regulations, process, the business etiquette, the communication, all of those intangibles. That's where you really need to focus your attention so that you ensure that the value system at the core is aligned to both personally as well as within the organization, but that you're sensitive to the variances. You don't assume anything. You don't take anything for granted. You embrace those differences because, of course, the diversity of the approach is going to make for optimal outcomes and performance. So I think that, I've said a lot about the intangible, about the value systems, culture, communication, all of those things you can't quite put your finger on, but absolutely critical to your success in working with organizations that are not in your hometown or home jurisdiction.
Again, I really love your answer, because basically you're saying it is different, it is intangible, but lean in to your colleagues, lean in to your peers, to your bosses, to your leaders, and do not be afraid to ask. This is a little different. Is it my impression, or this is the way it is? Is it okay to be doing it this way or that way? Or how can I do it better to have better communication between these teams? And I think it's really important to do that. And as you said, some of them are very, very different. I've worked international business before, and I had, like, for every trade mission I did, I used to work with trade missions, I would do a whole session in cultural differences and how to bridge those, like how long the meetings go, how do you start a meeting, what to expect when you send an email, what to expect when you call, and how even to dress to meetings. And so it's very it's very important that people understand the cultural nuances, and basically managing and working across cultures. Especially we are in a global environment, but the cultural nuances are very important. It's almost like they should not be called nuances, because they are very important points that if they're not followed, they might seem small, but they're really crucial to the success of any executive moving that way. Awesome. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about your project management experience and the fact that you led some large change management programs in your position as VP Strategic Initiatives. And how did those change management programs, work with that? And how did they progress Talk a little bit about your project management experience in that way, please.
Okay. Of course. Thank you, Paola. I guess in the spirit of what is intended, we both have the knowledge transfer piece. So we want to share some of, best practices or things we've learned, but also to help mentor those that are just starting out in their careers and forging their own paths. And so to that, though most recently, actually not just most recently, throughout my career, from being a teller at one of the big five to yesterday, projects are a day-to-day activity in any industry. Any organization has projects, and projects by definition have a beginning and an end. But I also didn't mention that I have the PMP designation. And folks do ask me, or have asked me, why did you see a career in project management? Truthfully, I didn't see my career in project management, but I knew that projects had been and would forever be an integral part of any successes within an organization. And of course, for myself. And so treating things as projects from both a personal career standpoint as well as an organizational standpoint were quite critical. You cannot get away from projects being so core to all of the functions of a business. Think about change management. Think about digital transformation. Think about, new HR approaches and philosophies within an organization. Think about the development of mission and values and vision. All of these things are approached from a project standpoint. And so to share some of my learnings with all of you, first is, do not underestimate the importance of projects and understanding the mechanics of projects and the discipline of project management. Now, there has been a traditional approach to project management, which was primarily waterfall. You plan everything in advance, every little comma, period, cross T and dotted I. And of course, that took up so much time that the development of a project plan became a project in and of itself. And so keeping that in mind, know what those facets of a structure are in project management. Know that everything within project management is important to be aware of, but not necessarily important to execute on every one of those elements. Project management has really started, and well, actually over the last decade has really evolved and continues to evolve. So where it has been traditionally very structured, very disciplined, you must A, B, and C, according to, the PMBOK from 10 to 15 years ago, that waterfall approach, very sequential, the check marks in every box. It really has become an exercise with time and experience of my own, but also of academia and practical knowledge with the technology and how it's evolved so quickly. Agile project methodology, iterative approaches to project management, and, the development of prototypes. And so I'm really glad that there's this ongoing evolution of project management disciplines. Although, going back to Paola's question about, the large scale projects, even as VP of strategic initiatives, organizations often talk about being ready for, that digital transformation, that, embracing change. And often they're just not ready to let go of all of those habits in the background where they make very small incremental changes without something that is so critical to keep in mind, and that is materiality. Where are the quantum leaps going to be in accomplishing something with the project? So when you think about projects and all the pieces, all the structure that exists in project management, you have to be willing to be flexible, adaptable to your project management style in terms of and in the context of the project itself. Start with the end in mind. What is the end goal? Be strategic about what the project plan is going to be. I've teased lots of colleagues, both from an academic as well as professional standpoint. You need to be strategic, and you don't need to have a project plan that is all encompassing, because then you spend a lot of time on the plan and not a lot of time on the execution. And so for me, the most important part of project management is actually stakeholder engagement. And that is surprising to a lot of people because it has very little to do with, the development of the technology or the business requirements or the documenting of everything. Without stakeholder engagement, you do have a real risk of lacking success in execution. Nothing else will matter if you can't execute. Doesn't matter how beautiful the end project completion is if nobody's willing to use it, if no one's willing to embrace it, if no one is providing the engagement, the feedback that's necessary in order to optimize the completion and execution of that project. So ensure that your project approach is fit for purpose. Every project is not the same. It's not a one size fits all. The discipline exists, and I believe all of the facets of project management are there so that you can decide what is going to fit or not fit in achieving what your goal is and what, again, your end is in mind. So, even while you're starting out your career, treat everything, even updating your CV as a project. Think about it ahead of time. And some final tips on it. 1, no foregone conclusion. Don't assume anything about what your project has to be until you put the thought work in ahead of time. Do a little bit of research, not just academic, but social engagement. Talk to some peers, talk to stakeholders, talk to your mentors, talk to individuals with knowledge of the subject or what you're trying to do. And then don't be afraid to customize it or change it to your needs. That will ensure that you are always going to keep in mind priority and materiality. Look for the quantum leaps in completing your project because everything's going to be a trade-off. Time, resource, money, and start with the end in mind. No foregone conclusions. Don't be afraid to customize, change it to your needs, thought work ahead of time. And last, start with the end in mind.
Very, again, very, very interesting answer, not expected. So I see a trend here, and the trend is it's about the project, it's about the work, but it really is about the people,
Absolutely.
your customers and the stakeholders. Having that knowledge to do your job it's absolutely a very important part of it. But if you don't have your leaders, your team, your customers engaged, it really doesn't make sense. And the second one is be flexible, because there'll be curveballs. So it is about the path, but it really is in project management about where you want to go. But if you don't have all those pieces together, it's just not going to get there. It's not going to be successful. So excellent. Thank you. The last question before the crystal ball is, you held positions as board member in financial institutions, giving a diversity and inclusion agenda for companies. Is that something that interests you in the future? Is it the next step?
That's also part of the crystal ball. So it's, it is a really interesting time, and it's a really opportune time. Financial institutions, federally regulated, and such a core to the Canadian business landscape, our economy, and to being consumers, having a bank account, where do you get paid, getting a car loan, mortgage, and the rest of it. And so when you think about financial institutions and their dedication to gender equality and diversity more broadly, to include LGBTQ as well as racial equality, these have become unavoidable for financial institutions to ensure are under consideration. And I welcome the change, having grown up in male-dominated industry and financial services, having on numerous occasions been the only female voice at a table, and often not feeling heard, frankly. And so for me, it is, it's such a huge moment in our history, for industry, for organizations, for the banks, for financial institutions, to find that diversity of voice and to want to be that diversity of voice. So the short answer, Paola, is yes. I would, of course, love to do board work for financial institutions, and focus and dedicate myself to strategic development, strategic thought, and oversight in board participation and work. It's, it's still out there. A lot of organizations believe just hiring women is enough, or hiring, racialized individuals is enough. Well, it's not enough if no one's listening. It's not just, another tick in a box. Oh, look, we're diverse. We have another woman on the executive, or we're diverse. We have, someone who is racialized on our board. It is not enough if those individuals are brought in, but are not given the respect or the voice, the ability to both have a voice and be heard. And frankly, it is the men that are the most important participants in bringing legitimate gender, racial, and LGBTQ equality into the boardrooms and into good governance for not just financial institutions, but for any organization that has that level of governance. I recognize that a lot of decisions, particularly around boards and directors, those decisions are made through networking that are outside of the realm of a lot of women or racialized individuals that are not at that function or, that round of golf. And so, as women or as racialized individuals, we too need to be better at networking. We too need to be better at both reaching out to get help or to provide help. As a woman, I think it's really critical for me to be a mentor to other women, but also to men, so that they can really understand the perspective of the women that they work shoulder to shoulder with, and to ensure that when women are given that voice, or again, I'm not a racialized individual, but in all facets of diversity, that inclusiveness is not just, again, it's not just a gesture, but it has a true moving, legitimate force within a board or within an organization. And so for me, I've fast tracked that a little bit, given my recent employment circumstances, to do that dedicated strategic work, to bring that positive strategic voice to a board, and to governance, from both, the female perspective as well as the diversity perspective, with all of the qualifications. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of it. But for those that are looking for that path, and some of the investigatory and research work that I've done, the ICD does have some courses and is well recognized. It can be expensive, but working on volunteer boards is a really terrific way to start. If you have kids, for example, lots of schools, if you belong to a professional association, get involved, and lots of academic areas. Government often has, volunteer positions, and lots of charitable organizations are constantly looking for great minds to participate in not just their governance, but their strategic direction. And so that is my thought on boards and diversity, and perhaps where you may find me one day.
Great. It's so funny when you talk about those things, like so many things resonate, especially like being the only, female in the room, or
Yep.
really feeling they're not being heard. And especially when you bring up the networking part where we're not there. And it's I think it happens to most of us, that kind of feeling, or how you position yourself. I think at some point you just get a little, you'll get used to it so much that that's your modus operandi. You know what's going to happen. When you get into the room. And I think we all develop different strategies to deal with it. So excellent points. Thank you very much again. We are going to do, I think we're running out of time, but we're going to do our crystal ball question. Okay. So given your experience in innovation strategy, what you think would be the top investment in innovation credit unions can do in the present environment?
I'm going to go with two. Mm-hmm. So the first one, I think, is not so innovative per se, but addresses, I believe, what has been an underlying challenge in the credit union space. And that is the governance structure and the tools to enable the governance structure to render it the most effective. How credit unions operate is essentially, if you are a credit union customer, you can apply to get on its board. So we were just talking about boards. And so that has to do with governance, credit unions, anybody essentially that is a customer of that credit union, get on their board. The challenge you get with that is you have really well-meaning individuals who may not necessarily have the knowledge, the experience, the agility, the business acumen, the political acumen, understanding, regulation, capital adequacy, legislative requirements, and yet they are at the table that are facilitating these strategic decisions for a credit union. So an idea from, an innovative standpoint, most board work, as I have participated in volunteer boards as well as disciplinary boards and government boards, is there is a software that basically is a repository of board minutes and all appendices and supporting documentation information. I believe that this software type of tool should also include, glossary type information and knowledge transfer pieces for those board members to be able to lean on as they are preparing for board meetings. So fit for purpose to the upcoming meeting, or more broad, better orientation, better, information at your fingertips as a board member when you are preparing for these really critical decision-making points at a board construct and through the governance of that credit union within the credit union environment. So that membership of their board is both a shortcoming and I think a strength because of that true diversity. But the knowledge gap, I think, is the one that really needs to be addressed in order for any given credit union to be the most effective that it can be. The second crystal ball sort of recommendation to credit unions, and this one takes a lot more courage, and that is, and I believe to some extent it already exists, is a lot of the payment services and processing are already amalgamated through central organizations. But I believe that when we talk about business ecosystems, credit unions, because they are smaller, because they are niche, because therefore they would have limited resources, both either financial or expertise, should be able to pool their resources in a way to be orchestrators within the industry. So if in fact the credit unions are pooling data, are pooling risk management practices, again, not to give away the secret sauce, but to have the courage to make that step, to share core information that in effect would be for the greater good. So it's not just my credit union, it is our credit union system within the province, within the country, has a stronger voice, has stronger data, information, evidence-based information on upcoming trends, long-range trends. We talk about open banking concepts and where do credit unions fit in. But that comes, I believe, more strategically if there is true collaboration amongst credit unions who should not be working at cross purposes and necessarily competitive on all fronts. And I do know that there are some organizations for information sharing and knowledge transfer, but I do believe that this is a really lost opportunity for credit unions to really up their game in terms of the access to information that each unique credit union or discrete credit union would have, as opposed to the strength of the whole. And so those are my two crystal ball ideas, Paola, for credit unions and how they can make quantum leaps, right? I mentioned in the project management piece, you have to think about the materiality. And those are the two areas that I believe credit unions can really gain material benefit, both individually as well as collectively, so long as they have the courage to do it.
That's, yeah, I love both of your answers in that. In the last one, I think credit unions are inherently, they do work together to some point. You have the Canadian Credit Union Association, CCUA, and sort of sort of providing knowledge in some way and resources to those credit unions. And I think they have more of a competitive edge than banks. The five top banks especially do. They compete, but in different levels, because there's so many different sizes of credit unions and regions. So I really hope that would work. And I love the governance part where everyone's in the same page. They'll have access to the same information, like amazing ideas. We'll give you the IP for that, the credit. But thank you so much for being here today, Anthonet, and so much for your insights. It's been a great pleasure, and we'll hope to have you back soon.
Paola, thank you. And thank you to everyone at BBA for, amazing insights throughout the year, but also the opportunity to share and hopefully make a difference and provide some guidance to folks that are viewing. So thank you to all of you, and good luck to everyone in your career aspirations and the work you do to make, our world a better place.
Thank you so much.